Hello everyone, and thanks for keeping in. Today we are going to start a new course on a new topic, which is accounting for financial leases. This time I created it on a new platform, which is Google Classroom, and it will work a bit differently from what we did so far. I will provide you with a link to the course via email, and I will also put it under the video so that you can click it and join the course. It is open for everyone and it is free. Also, I would like to remind you to subscribe to my channel in order not to miss any updates. So today's topic is leases. And what do we know about leases? This is a situation when some owner of the asset provides the other company the rights to use this asset and for some consideration. But before going into detail, let's talk a bit about how to read the guidance. What do we have in that course? Let's see. So a couple words about prerequisites for the course. Basically, you need to have some accounting knowledge and some business knowledge to understand the concepts and definitions, but you don't need to have a deep knowledge. We are going to get some deep knowledge from that guidance in that course. Here is a link to the course. As usual, I use PwC guidances, but other before guidances as good as PwC one. Maybe if you have some specific question, you will want to review other guidance, and then we will do some work in the spreadsheets or Google documents, and you will have to know some formulas. It's pretty basic stuff, nothing special. Okay, so basically we get to the guidance. Here it is. And now we will discuss how to approach that guidance. First of all, we need to understand what our goals are. Why do we want to know about leases? That could be a situation when we already have some accounting knowledge and we came across some lease contract and we want to reflect it properly. Let me go back to the course. Okay, then we might want to apply to a position which lists knowledge of leases in the requirements. In that case, we want to know more about leases, we want to learn as much as we can, and we also want to look into some specific situations, into some pitfalls, exceptions. If our interviewer is kind of experienced person, they might want to try to ask some very tricky questions about leases. Or if we are already working in the company and we know that we will be exposed to lease agreements, we want to be able to distinguish between different lease agreements and be able to spot a lease agreements or spot a lease in some other type of agreements, like some revenue agreements might include lease components. Or our company wants to transition to US GAAP from other guidance, from IFRS or from other non-GAAP guidance, from cash basis of accounting, and we want to know how to do that. All of that is covered in the lease guidance. So our next step would be to study the contents of the lease. So let's take a look here. So these are the contents which I'm talking about. And the lease guidance, similarly to other guidances, have some basic structure. So we have introduction or the conclusion section, which should cover history, scope, effective date, transition, implementation requirements, that kind of references to that let's go back to my document. So we have it here, intro, outro, and that will reference mostly these transition requirements. Then we have basic accounting stuff. What do we usually learn from basic? We usually learn the classification of leases, initial recognition, subsequent measurements. So basically, how many different types of leases are there? What is the double entry when we first enter into the lease agreement? After we enter, what entries do we have to do monthly in order to keep up with the leases? That's subsequent measurements. Impairment, do we need to measure our lease assets for impairment? Modification and remeasurements. What happens if we renegotiate the lease agreement with the lessor or with the lessee? What double entry we can have due to that? Okay, then every guidance has some specific transactions which are more complicated than the average, something unusual, or something which is not accounted as a typical lease transaction. In our guidance, that's the case for sale and leaseback, leverage leases, and several other topics which we want to know about. Okay, what else do we have here? Among other topics, there are such as business combinations and its impact on leases, consolidations, currency translations. And the last point in the guidance is presentation and disclosure in the financial statements. So when we already learned how to do a double entry for leases on initial recognition, how to measure it subsequently, when we did impairment considerations, at the end of the year, we need to reflect all necessary information about the leases in the financial statements. Okay, so here we have a little exercise. I advise you to open the lease guidance by the link and try to memorize the contents and maybe read through some definitions. Usually you can find definitions like in the introduction or scope, like definition of the lease here. And try to memorize, understand something of that. Why do I want you to memorize this stuff? That's because it helps you to deal with some situations on the spot. For example, if you find out that some of your rental agreements are modified, if you know what the guidance content is, and you remember there is like a special section on modification and remeasurements for the leases, you know that first thing you do when you find out that something is modified, you go to the guidance and try to assess the impact. If you don't know the guidance, if you forget it, or if you never read it, you might just overlook such situation. And the other example I have here is for a job interview. If you don't know an answer to some specific lease questions, some complicated one, but you remember that was like an exception, or that was like a specific case in the guidance, you can bring it up on the interview and say, okay, I don't know what the treatment for sale and leaseback is, but when I was going through the lease guidance, I noted that it was stated separately. So I believe it can have some treatment different from typical leases. Okay, and now we have some more points in plan here. So as an assignment for this lesson. We will do some preliminary process documentation or flowchart, or call it schema, algorithm, whatever you want. We will do some basic steps to reflect leases. Then, as we will go through that course, we will be updating that process. And when it's done, you will then go through it on your own to keep up your knowledge and to memorize it better. And as an option to get even better understanding of the leases, you can teach someone to account for leases. Okay, so let's look into our homework for that lesson. In that course, we have like an assignment 0.2, which has an attachment. And in that attachment, so here you will have to list your goal, and I believe you will get your own copy of that assignment. So here you list your goal, then you go according to that plan, study the contents of the guidance, classification, initial recognition, subsequent measurement, and so on. So for example, I started here for you. So what do we know about classification? You can look into the guidance or you can make assumptions. We will go through all of that together, but now you just need to create some template. Okay, so what questions can we ask here? Does this guidance cover both sides of the transaction? Yes. In some situations, the guidance is only one-sided, like for the revenue. It covers the revenue, but it doesn't cover the receiving party guidance. In our case, the guidance covers two sides, receiving sides and providing side, the lessor and lessee. Lessee who gets the assets and pays, and lessor who provides the assets and get paid. So we got some initial classification here. Then we have second level. Are there any different categories of leases within these ones? So now I put type 1 here, type 2. We assume there are several. On the next hour steps, we will be more specific about that. Then initial recognition. What questions will you ask here? For example, what is debit and credit? How do I calculate debit, credit? So you need to come up with some questions about how are you going to address that problem. Then the next one will be subsequent. And respectfully, for every type of the lease you want to concentrate on, you will have your own questions and answers. And we will try to fill in that table. A reminder, you should base your work on that paragraph. Thank you for your time and have a great day. See you on the next lecture.